Well, the very first reaction from my perspective is typically fear. Fear among the issuers who are targeted and also those who weren't targeted. And my perspective is actually informed by the fact that I'm mostly working on Europe, the Middle East and Latin America, where campaigns like the highly active campaigns that you're talking about have not been prevalent to date. We have seen actually an increase in that activity, but there's still not that many cases. I can almost count them on one hand. Most activism from shareholders comes in a much more subtle way in these markets, and it's mostly behind the scenes, such that these high-profile, publicly debated campaigns are usually very rare, and they can be very vitriolic, and they do tend to result in just an extreme level of fear among issuers that they could be targeted next. Or if they have been targeted, they're very fearful of what the outcome may be. In general, that seems to be moving towards a more positive direction, where issuers are now actually reevaluating their approach altogether. They tend to be talking to shareholders more actively in order to prevent an active campaign or to at least better understand where that campaign is coming from and how their shareholders would react to a campaign if there were to be one. Broadly speaking, I would say most issuers are thinking about whether there are blind spots in their own strategy and in their own performance that could lead to them becoming a target. And that's positive. It's actually very positive to see that boards are being more proactive in not only talking to their shareholders, but critically assessing the risks that they face and their performance as a company. So for the most part, we see companies in these areas in Europe and Latin America maybe moving to a more proactive approach, which again is probably a positive step. Well, the main effect is just actually increasing the amount of engagement, really. It can also increase the kind of quality of the engagements in the fact that companies realize that they need to be asking shareholders about how their shareholders perceive their strategy, and how they perceive their performance and their risks. In general, we see companies now asking more leading questions rather than just presenting a PowerPoint that says they're doing a fantastic job. They're more likely to actually ask their shareholders what risks do they see and what do they want them to adjust, where do they want them to adjust course. Because companies realize that by asking those questions and by getting answers earlier on, that they face less risk later from some sort of active campaign that could be quite hostile. As of right now, there is actually a lot of engagement happening in the UK and in some European markets between issuers and investors, but definitely the direction that things are going is for more and more engagement. I definitely anticipate that companies will be having to, both companies and issuers will be having to scale their engagement activities just to be able to meet the demand that they have. Issuers and investors are also getting more savvy about how to approach engagements so that they get value out of them. So rather than always having just a simple check-in, to be able to talk about the same topics, basic corporate governance and performance topics, they might actually really drill down into more specific issues, particularly sustainability issues, so environmental and social concerns that involve other stakeholders, because there is an increasing focus from regulators and from the underlying beneficial owners of asset managers to focus on the interests of other stakeholders. So really, I think that the direction that engagement is going in these markets is for more engagement, but more quality engagement around topics that really affect everyone in society and not just shareholders. Further, I would say that we're seeing a move away from kind of a shorter term perspective to talking about more long-term trends, which is a much more difficult conversation to have. So talking about companies' contributions to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, for example. That's not a routine conversation that the typical investor relations person is ready to talk about without some level of preparation. So there's really a lot more preparation that's required just to come to terms with the kinds of conversations that investors want to have and issuers need to be able to have in order to align with this kind of refocus on long-term alignment of goals between shareholders and other stakeholders.